I run a YouTube channel, which has grown to be the largest one at the Middle East, solo run, doing Israel advocacy. You're a big part of that with the information that you have. Now, with all of this information, I didn't serve in the IDF, I moved to Israel, so I decided to enlist myself into my own army service to fight this propaganda war. But it's very hard for me to measure my work because I've found that the past 11 months I'm dealing with a lot of overly emotional and underly informed individuals. My community on YouTube is Christian, Catholic, and Muslim, and some Jewish people. The information that I've received from you on the internet is profound information that I find very hard to get to the right people. All of us in this room understand and hear this information, know it to be very factual. The people that need to be hearing it aren't hearing it. Your interview with Ben Shapiro, he said something that I'll never forget. He said that this is the first time in the world that 15 and 16-year-olds are having access to war on TikTok. They are seeing war unfold. And so I find that this information that I've found so valuable from you as the leading world expert in modern warfare means really to the people who need to hear it, kind of nothing, because they always comment with, yeah, but the kids, but the women. Given the context, the short one that I just gave you, what do you suggest is an approach for me to try and talk to these individuals being so overly emotional and underly informed?
This past weekend, I had the opportunity to ask John Spencer a question in person while he spoke at the IAC Summit, the Israeli-American Council Summit, which was just held this past weekend in Washington, D.C. This is the first time that I've ever attended this summit. Just imagine a nucleus of all the thought leaders, the authors, the business women, the businessmen, the politicians, the people who are important on the forefront of trying to spread as much positive awareness for the advocacy for Israel and for Jewish people in the diaspora. I was able to listen to lots of different experts in so many different fields that aren't just Jewish. And John Spencer, for those of you who don't know, is the world's leading expert in modern urban warfare. It is the equivalent of the Michael Jordan of the NBA, the Tom Brady in football. He's the guy, the person who knows the most, is the most informed about modern urban warfare. And I listened to one of his lectures. In fact, right before I stepped into the room, I was looking at the pamphlet to see what the roster is, and they had 3 different rooms, with different lectures happening at the same time. So you had to choose between which room you wanted to attend. I didn't even know John was coming to the summit. And as my eyes were skimming the page and I came across his name, I didn't even hesitate to go find out where that room was. I was one of the first people there. I got myself a seat in the front row and I was glued to him. I'm sitting there realizing, here's the Michael Jordan, the Tom Brady of modern urban warfare right in front of me, somebody who I've spent time studying and listening to the past 11 months of my life, trying to get the most credible, accurate information from who? From him. He's the guy, he's the source. And I'm sitting there realizing I'm now here in person. For those of you who don't know, 11 months ago, I was a basketball fitness coach. I was a kid, young gentleman in the world of sports and fitness, training basketball players, boys and girls, men and women, all the way from 8 years old, all the way up to 37-year-old NBA vets, women's teams, national players, training people online. I was in this world of fitness in basketball, trying to pursue that as my full time. And then the war started and I pivoted quickly into trying to fight this media online propaganda war. And sometimes I realized, it's very easy to say that I have no business doing this. But at the same time, while I am no expert in modern urban warfare, I am no geopolitician, I'm not a government spokesperson, I represent myself. I'm here to bring people along this journey to come and find out more with me as I share my truth. And my truth also comes from my own experiences and perspectives, but it also comes from finding accurate information. And I found John to be the person to understand exactly more about proportionality, moral and ethical code of conduct being played out during war, comparing it to history and what we're seeing now unfold in the Middle East. And it has really allowed me to have a much better understanding of what is actually happening. I have access to soldiers and I have access to people who are reservists in Gaza or in the northern border. And then you have somebody like John who, to me, has a lot of authority as well because he's been to Gaza. He's been to Khan Yunis. He spent time in tunnels. He goes there. He's not just observing from afar. And while he was speaking, I was sitting there realizing that I'm struggling with taking a lot of the information that he's provided for such a long time. He's not even Jewish. He's just there to share the truth. And his information is so valuable and obviously supports my idea of sharing Israel's right to defend themselves from terrorism. And John vouches for that too. But I find that all the information that he's sharing with the world for free isn't really being heard by the people that need to be hearing it. The people that don't believe, the people that don't lean into facts, the people that don't lean into truth, no matter how valuable this information is or how educated you are. And I expressed this in my question to John because I am no expert. And it's very easy to see that I don't have a degree in Middle Eastern politics, Middle Eastern history, and I do live there though. And I know a lot and I speak to people. But I wanted to see what John's perspective was on how someone like me, who's fighting this online propaganda war, can find a way to try and get his information or the right information to the people that need to hear it.
I fight in this space because I believe in the truth. I believe that this is indicative of the future. If this is allowed to stand where the truth, it doesn't matter. It only matters what people believe. One of the things that if I was king of the world, I would put out one understanding that that innocence being harmed, especially children, evokes immense emotion, to include in me. And any soldier that I ever served with who saw a child wounded in any way, it tore them up, even moral injury. Even if you know the U.S. military history, the first Battle of Fallujah, it was Al Jazeera airing of children that had been harmed. The message absolutely has to be shown on what all the IDF in this case is doing to prevent it. But it's really hard because kids, to include my child who comes home from school and says, "Dad, is Hamas the good guys?" Luckily they have me as a dad. But we're in a world where the world has forgot what war looks like. We're in a world where the world has forgotten, to include people who are in positions of power, what the laws of war actually say and why they say the things they do. That they're not quantitative, they're qualitative, they're context driven. That we need classes on War 101. This is the level, I believe in the social media space, I engage in it, but we always assume one thing, that the other person knows what we're talking about. And I've found just as somebody who talks about war, like that, they're not understanding anything to do with war. Like, why don't you just stop? All the killing will stop. And then we have the biggest problem, though, which I think gets to that question that's very emotive, is that we, to include, our greatest universities are creating the dumbest people. They project their values on the other person they view as the victim. So this is where I would engage in multiple conversations about what does Hamas say that they want? What does Hamas do to ensure their civilians are harmed? What does even the tunnel system, that all 2.2 million of the Palestinian people in Gaza who weren't, because of Egypt, allowed out, could fit in Hamas's tunnel with ease. But there is no civilians, there's only Israeli hostages being starved in tunnels. I don't know how the approach is a problem, but it literally is dumbing it down, where we have a problem in critical thinking, as Ben and other people address, is where we have to find a way to get a message within that emotion to, okay, wait for a minute, now in this horrible situation, which I'm not gonna tell you it didn't happen, who caused it, what's the context? In my world, context is everything. But because of these 30-second clips, I can remove all the context, just show you the emotion. It's almost like we have to have a digital literacy starting at kindergarten, really, of what are you watching? Ask the question of what is the context to this, what you're watching. So I know that's not an answer. Thanks for what you're doing to fight in that fight.
And it really was refreshing hearing what he said, because he wasn't the first speaker this weekend to talk about how always sticking to the truth, but approaching the truth through the emotions. In my question, I talked about how I've been dealing with overly emotional and underly informed people. I've been using this phrase since October. A lot of the people that hear the side of somebody who is pro-Israel, let them finish speaking, but then say, but the kids, but the women, but. And a lot of this comes from an emotional state, a highly triggered emotional state. It's very easy to make the case, and I understand because it's awful and it's tragic, and John agrees, and anyone with a moral compass, a good one, would agree that any kids, women, children, anywhere in the world, Jew, non-Jew, Palestine, Israel, dying is a bad thing. And when people come from the vantage point of showing pictures to me in Instagram DMs or messaging me or on YouTube saying but, and they show me pictures of the kids and the women, they are showing their side from an emotional state. And they're completely ignoring everything else, the context that matters as to what resulted in one of those kids being killed. Who are the people oppressing those kids? Who are the people making those kids suffer? And they're not even open to discussion. Part of the reason is because unfortunately it hurts their narrative. But nothing at this point can puncture their narrative. And I'm more now in the camp of leaning in towards the emotional state of people and lowering and decreasing the emotional state of people before you can even approach them with facts and truth, because it doesn't even seem like the Michael Jordan and the Tom Brady of modern urban warfare, even his facts and his truth that he studies the majority of his life in this, that's not even gonna do it. So if John's not gonna be able to get through to these people, Barack, the basketball coach from 11 months ago, who suddenly decided to start talking about his experience living in Israel, providing a boots on the ground reality, he for sure won't be able to. You know, my daily routine is pretty frustrating because a lot of the times, even in person, but mostly online, I'm just surrounded by people that willfully ignore facts that don't help their own narrative. And here we have John Spencer, a bystander who is speaking up. He's, I said this before, not even Jewish. And I would be doing a disservice by not trying to amplify his information and his narrative. Asking him this question, I have to be honest, right before I spoke, I was nervous. Not because of the question, but because I found myself asking John Spencer, the number one, this is my time to stand up and my time to ask him a question. I was nervous, but as soon as I started talking, it went away, and I was expecting it to go away. And I never thought that I would ever be in the position to be doing public speaking and this sort of motivational aspect of things in the realm of Israel advocacy. And it's been pretty cool to reflect on the past almost year, how I'll never forget the first video I came across of John when he was speaking about the code of conduct of how war is being played out and how Israel has been applying a very moral code of conduct when it comes to the proportionality rates of civilian to terrorist death ratios, and comparing it to previous wars through history, which we all know to be true. Yet none of this information really matters to the people that John knows need to hear it, and I know need to hear it. But it was nice hearing someone like him say that it's just a reminder for us to continue to deploy truth. And John said something while he was speaking that I'll never forget. He said that everyone is entitled to their own opinions, but everyone is not entitled to their own facts. Facts, if supported by evidence and are proven to be true, are not disputable. A fact is a fact. The fact and the numbers coming out on the ground, proven through evidence and statistics, are not disputable, but somehow we have found ourselves with people who are willing to dispute these or rightfully ignore them because it hurts their narrative, which means that logic at this point doesn't even matter. And John, his work, his dedication, teaching at West Point modern urban warfare is all about numbers and facts and ratios and proportionality and ethics and morals and code of conduct and law, all of the things that require critical thinking, asking good questions, asking challenging questions, doing research, following up. All of these things aren't being done. But reflecting on the moment to be able to find myself here in Washington, D.C., in front of the God of modern urban warfare was a really special moment for me. And of course, I had to wait in line after because I wanted a picture with him, shake him, look him in the eye, and thank him for everything that he is doing. I have so much admiration and respect for those that have chosen to speak up, not because of a political agenda. John never talked about politics, doesn't really talk about politics at all. He has an agenda of truth. And truth is always the one thing that if you continue to push that into the narrative that you're trying to fight against, will always prevail. And that is the one thing that helps me go to bed at night. I'm not part of a camp, part of a theory or school of thought that needs to go around the truth, bend the truth, fake things, fake it till you make it, come up with false stories to make that look like the truth. That is exactly what I have been going up against and what we are, those who support Israel's right to defend themselves, are going up against. And John knows that. And yet he's still here saying and talking about the same things. And this was a really cool moment for me and I'll never forget it. John, I just want to say thank you. Chances are you're probably not going to come across this video. You may not remember that we were able to meet, but a large amount of my knowledge in the war front side of things and understanding more about how war should be conducted, what Israel has and hasn't been doing, especially as somebody who, for those of you who don't know, I didn't serve in the army when I made Aliyah, when I immigrated into Israel, which is why, again, I've enlisted myself into this media propaganda war on my own. So I haven't been a combat soldier. I haven't worn a uniform. I haven't had a gun around and a strap around my shoulders. I haven't been on the front lines. I don't even speak army language. So I still am coming from the perspective of an outsider, like I said earlier, not an expert in any particular place, but trying to hear more and more from all sorts of angles and understand where I can put things together that make sense, but also are backed by logic. And so, John, thank you so much for all that you're doing for Israel, for the world, for sticking true to who you are, standing up for what you believe in without having a political agenda with anything, but using your life's work and dedication of trying to show more about how your field applies to the world. We can't thank you enough for that. You know, and the last thing that I want to say is being vulnerable and vulnerability is no longer a bad thing. I was in that room with press and media and journalists from the New York Times and magazines and newspapers and television channels. And here comes this young gentleman, this kid who runs a YouTube channel, who used to be a basketball coach, comes from the fitness world, asking a question which turned out to be the one that hit for a lot of people. And how do I know this? Because I had people from the entire room come up to me throughout the rest of that day and a half explaining how much they appreciated the question, how much they related to the question, and how it really hit home for a lot of people. I put myself out there in a vulnerable state, not an expert, not a journalist, not covering any media or press or news station, as an independent person representing themselves alone, here asking the person who is the leader across the world in this specific field. And I'll never forget that moment, and it's just only gonna add to my ability to understand this conversation a little bit more.